that.
Are you recording this, Ray? I
Yeah,
think
I'm
this will
recording.
be recorded. We can go back to it.
Yeah, I'm recording so people can look at it later.
Okay. Now, the issue, the entire issue for one, it's an unfortunate issue, and that we have to even deal with it. Africans, this subject, African versus African Americans, is a very tired subject, if you ask me, because the subject itself perpetuates our stagnation. But due to the fact that there are these issues that exist, I think the question that you asked is a question that we must needs address in order to overcome it, with the ultimate aim being progress for all of us. And I don't know which level we are on in terms of the participants in this conversation. If some people are in the intro level and can't see any reason for black people, when I say black people, I mean anyone who is a descendant of Africa, to unite. Now, there are going to be those that say, I have different things in my ancestry. Your Woods, who claims to be Caucasian. Some will say, well, no, I have Irish in my background. I have this in my background. In the words of Dr. Joy Degree, in a racist society, you're all niggers, right? So with that in mind, persecution that African people and African descendants face worldwide being consistent, no matter which part of Africa you come from, or which part of the diaspora or the dispersion that you come from.
Hey, look,
we still face the same issue.
It's your mother.
Pointedly, what you said. One second, I'm coming. I'm going to wrap it up in just a second.
I'm going to bring Makia in this conversation.
Said about
Makia, get your mother. Go ahead.
Okay. Pointedly, what you said about Africans isolating themselves when they go to the United States or not associating with African Americans, that's a very broad statement, and you can't blanket it, because I submit to you that if you go to Boston right now, you'll have a large community of Ugandans, and those Ugandans not only don't associate themselves with African Americans, they don't connect and associate themselves with any other group from Africa. So it's not an issue of Africans being against African Americans. Everywhere I have gone, Nigerians don't integrate. They prefer to be with themselves. I'm in South Africa right now, and I can go find where Somalians are. Somalians are all over the globe, and everywhere I've been in this world and seen Somalians, they tend to be with Somalians. Everywhere I go in this world and I see Nigerians, they remain with Nigerians, and entire rest of the diaspora. Some groups may gravitate towards people from the same region of Africa that they come from. But even with that, you have within that some people from the same region don't like to associate with other people from that very same region. South Sudan being an example, I don't find anyone in the East African community or any group of people in the East African community that have an affinity for South Sudanese. I don't find anyone in Southern Africa that has an affinity for Angolans or Mozambicans. And it's not all a matter of language barrier either. You can go to Central Africa and you'd find people all French speaking, but they don't want to associate with people from the Congo when they go. So this thing of Africans tending to stay away from African Americans is a manufactured assessment, I think, intentionally manufactured by powers that benefit from the separation of African Americans from the continent of Africa. The late Dr. John Henrik Clarke said it best. He said the best trained, and I do agree with this, the best trained African on the planet is the African American. the best trained in research, the best trained in technology. And Dr. Clark said they don't know what the hell to do with it. They'll research for pink people before they research their own grandmother, but they're the best trained. Now, look at this, and I'll give the floor to anybody else who wants after I say this. You got Chinese people coming into Africa now, Germans, the hunkies, the pink people, Europeans have been here forever. Since we allowed them to come. Europeans are here, Chinese are here, Koreans are here, Russians are here, Germans are here, South American, Colombians, they're starting to come here. That stupid Brazilian hair weave mess is making so much money here. What is absent in the 29 countries in Africa that I have been to, what is absent is the presence of African Americans, of people on earth who have a right to be here, who have a right to invest in Africa, who have a right to do what the Chinese are coming here to do. Our presence, or the presence of African Americans, is not existent here. And it is not that we don't have the capacity to do it, because the latest Nielsen report says we have a buying capacity of $1.2 trillion. So we have the capacity to invest in the continent, just like the Chinese do, just like the Germans do, just like the French do. But because we have this manufactured understanding of a difference between us, we're not doing it.
All right, well,
we're at 11 minutes into the conversation, so I think I need to give way there.
Well, I'm going to try to be brief. I just want to respond to you. I think you're not taking other variables in consideration as it relates to the post. First, I think it's a very, very true statement that in many cases, most, not all, you can never say all, that in America, Africans go to America, for the most part, intently do not integrate or socialize in any meaningful way with African Americans. You gave the example of Boston, okay? And you said, well, the Ugandans in Boston, they don't socialize with anyone. Well, we all know that Boston is a very unique city in its racial structure and its racial history. Very unique. So that would make a lot of sense that the Ugandans would not associate with anyone. It's probably to their advantage in a city like Boston, so racially divided. Okay, but if you go to DC in Baltimore, where I'm from, okay, Ethiopians and Eritreans, they run 3 industries. They run parking lots, they run the parking game, they run the nightclub and bar game. Okay, so there's a heavy concentration of Ethiopians and Eritreans in DC, especially the DC area. Okay, if I tell my wife all the time, if you went to DC, you would not look at me, because the other Ethiopians and Eritreans would tell you, do not deal with a Black American. Okay, when we do deal with each other, it's a very superficial relationship. Ethiopian and Eritrean in DC will not do business with you. They're not going to worship with you. They won't invite you to their home. Why? Because they see the African American as a pariah.
May I ask a question, please?
Hold on a second, I'm not finished. And they will tell you, hey, look, what's wrong with you guys, man? How can I come? And I've had many conversations about this. They will tell you, how can I come from a poor area in Ethiopia?
You've been here for years.
And you've been here for years. And look what I have. I have a parking lot. And they'll tell you, we don't agree with you. We don't agree with how you guys interact with each other. So why would we interact with you when we don't even appreciate how you interact with each other? This is not only the case in DC. This is the case in Minneapolis, where there's a strong contingency of Somalians. Okay? They don't mess with, I'm going to tell you, the Ethi girls in DC, the Somalian girls, look at a Somalian girl here in Saudi Arabia. who a Somalian American girl. She's not gonna mess with a black dude, a black American, because she's.
Will they mess with Nigerians? Will they mess with Liberians? Will they mess with Congolese? That's what I'm saying. You got to ask yourself that question. I'm sorry to interject you.
But hold on a second. They'll mess with a European. They marry.
Now, listen, hold it. Stop right there.
No,
Everybody,
Can I say
all of the above. I'm going to step back out, but all of the above, Black Americans included. They're on the very, very rare occasion that I find Black Americans outside of the United States, their tendency is to gravitate towards other pink-skinned people as well. So that problem is across the board.
And I never said that. I'm not just blaming Africans for that, because I also said in my post that we are just as ignorant when it comes to our philosophy, our position, our perspective, our lack of knowledge of Africa makes us just as much as the antagonists in this deal. I'm not saying that African Americans are just. What I'm saying is there's
can I say something, Ray?
Yeah.
The whole post was saying that Africans do not identify with African Americans. Okay? Now, I agree with that. And I'm not so sure I'll be able to explain it very clearly, but I'll give you some examples. I've got lots of people from my community, from my country, from neighboring countries that have moved to Europe and have gotten married with the black version, the black Europeans, like the black Belgians, the black French people, okay? And when they left Africa, they knew that they were going to interact with them and to live with them peacefully. But now, on the other hand, my African people, my Kenyan people, my Kenyan relatives that have moved from Kenya to America have specifically been told, do not mix with these people because they have lost their culture. The culture is dilute. It is not who we are. They do not represent us. Okay? So yes, we do not identify with the Black Americans, but we do identify with the Blacks in other places.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to jump in if I can, Ray. I was, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, so we got a nice little, Somalian community in Cleveland as well. And I was just, on the side of a town that I wasn't familiar with, and it was actually prayer time. So, I decided to, go into the mosque, get clean and make prayer. I didn't know that I was walking into a quote unquote Somalian mosque with the Arabic guy actually giving the khutbah, versus sermon that day. So, I did what I did. I sat there and listened to the sermon or whatever. And afterwards, I go up to, a group of brothers, who was speaking, they were speaking, Somalian. And, I walked up, hey, how you guys doing? Such and such, nice, masjid. I wanted to come in. And they looked at me like I was crazy, and now the Arabs who had came out, they, had begun to dialect with me. And, then they get to dialecting with these guys. And I'm like, why do they want to dialect with these guys than me? I'm a guest. And y'all look just like me, but I'm a guest here. But they was so far up the Muslims, the Arabs wazoo. It was painstaking, man, for me to, actually be shut down out of a conversation, from brothers who look like me after we just prayed together.
And that proves my point. They don't listen. One of the things that hurt me most, and I think we had a conversation about this, KJ, is when I found out and realized that African Sudanese, African Ethiopians identify more with being Arab than they do with being African. Yeah. And I understand the relationship between Arabs and Africa is similar to the relationship between Caucasians and Africans.
Right.
But right now in Riyadh, and I don't know if this is the case. I'm assuming this is the case all throughout the world. You have Africans who feel like they're more Arab than they are African, and that really hurt me for a long, long time. I can get the American African problem because that's a problem of slavery, that's a problem of colonization, that's a problem of misinformation. I don't really get the, maybe I'm moving off topic a little bit, but that speaks to kind of your experience, and that's a very real thing. And let me say this: we're not talking today with respect to pointing fingers. I want to be very clear. The reason why Shamunga wanted to meet today is because he's hosting a conference next year dealing with this very issue of reconciliation. And I believe in order to reconcile, we must first come to the river and wash away our dirt. We must first go to the river and wash away our dirt. Because
excuse me.
Because we can't have reconciliation if we don't tell the truth and be honest about where we are now.
Excuse me. The issue that I think it's Brother Linnell. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly or not.
You got it, brother. You got it.
Brother from Cleveland. The issue that you have identified is an issue that is a major problem, even with, and you may have experienced this yourself, certain Black Americans that convert to Islam or revert, depending on your theological stance, to Islam. Even Black Americans I found, especially when I was in Saudi Arabia, they tried to be more Arab than even the Arab himself.
That's right.
Right. So it's not an issue. That right there is not necessarily an issue with
explain that statement. When you say
yes,
they're trying to be more Arab than even the Arabs themselves, what does that mean? And how does that tie into?
Well, here's the okay, I'm coming. Like Brother Linnell experienced there in that masjid in Cleveland. I've experienced the same thing with African Americans in Saudi Arabia, whose preference is to go and try to fraternize with Arabs, speak Arabic, and behave and dress the way that Arabs dress, not Muslims, Arabs. And they had, this is my personal experience, ostracize me or tried to ostracize me, isolate me, or cause problems for me. Ray can attest to it, and would try to ask me all kinds of questions and trying to treat me as if I'm different than them and that they are closely aligned or more closely aligned with Arabs. One particular brother, not even in Saudi Arabia, this was in the UAE, he was telling me that if I would be in Islam, the Arabs would treat you just like a brother. They take me just like I'm one of them. A few weeks into the semester, they sacked his behind. He secretly told our the person who was in charge of our region that they didn't want him there anymore, and they wanted me there because I was Black wearing African clothes. They were asking me to bring them some of these same types of clothes. They don't respect that. This is a problem that you see is so endemic now with Black Americans in the church that you don't even see even Africans. You can't get married unless you dress like a European. You can't even go to a worship service unless you go to a worship service like a European. So it's not as clearly identifiable because it's so much a part of what we have become in the church itself. And I go around the continent of Africa saying this, that what you all practice and what we practice in Black America, Black Africa, is not real following of Jesus. It is a following of European culture. And that's what's happening with those brothers in Islam. But back on to this main topic, because I don't think that it is worth us talking if we don't make progress and deal with these issues. This whole issue of Africans, the one that Kalai talked about, how she's taught When you go to America, you don't associate with black people and stuff like that. There's only one group I've seen from the continent of Africa that will associate with African Americans, and that's South Africans. And they don't associate with the educated African America. They associate with the hip hop, those guys who are the people that don't provide the best substance of African American culture. That idea, that attitude that Kalai said her family has expressed to her, you go to America, you don't associate with Black American people, these people have lost their culture, lost their identity. That is a manufactured identity. I mean, that is a manufactured divide there. Give you
But
two
it's a
examples,
divide
two
nevertheless.
quick.
It's a divide nevertheless.
Wait, let me hear the thing. But to find out where that division has come from is a great step, Ray.
Okay,
There was a pink man.
Before we find out where it has come from, I think it's very important we identify the several points of division. We have social factors, we have the family enterprise, we have educational factors we need to talk about, and spirituality, which you've touched on. And then I think all this sort of make us not be on the same page, because if my social upbringing is A and yours is C, then I will not be comfortable trying to hang out with you. So those are the things that I feel we need to think about.
Excuse me. Excuse me.
That gap.
Excuse me, Kalai, that's not accurate, because you find Africans in the United States that have far more divergence in terms of their difference between them and pink people than between them and black people, but they still go associate with pink people who don't have the same kind of understandings of spirituality. They still associate with pink people who are educated and socialized differently. They still go and educate with pink people who eat different, who have different understandings of what family is, what marriage is. So you can't say that those are serious areas of separation. Those are things which Africans have been manufactured to do. And African Americans at the same time have been manufactured to recognize, because you still see the same Kenyan who says they won't associate with African Americans because there's a difference of culture, there's a difference of social society, there's a difference of religion, there's a difference of this. They still go and associate with Europeans there that had the same differences, if not far more. So you can't say that, oh, these are real differences. The division between black people is a manufactured division. And this was a strategy used to conquer the continent of Africa from the very beginning. A Latin expression, dividere e regna, divide to rule.
So here's the question. How do we end that division? First, we end that division by saying that it is a division. We have to acknowledge. Hold on.
Preference is to say that there is difference. Difference is not division.
Correct.
Okay,
we
I'm
have
sorry.
to acknowledge it, and we have to acknowledge where exactly it is.
And that's my point. Because let me say this. I'm gonna share a story, and I don't mean to be anecdotal, but I'm gonna share this, and it should take a minute. When I went to VMI, okay, everyone knows for the most part, I graduated from Virginia Military Institute, all white. I mean, predominantly 95% white, teaches white values. We had to salute Stonewall Jackson, this Confederate general walking out of the barracks every day. I mean, you can't get more Caucasian. You can't get more Caucasian in this place. And I remember one night, my freshman year, all the black freshmen, and we all came from, there was a contingency of folks who came from Tidewater, Petersburg area, Richmond area. And then there was some other folks, including myself, who came from like Jersey, DC area. And we had a conversation, we were talking. So I noticed that this guy named Obi Ezekwe, he was from, I'm not sure where Obi's from, to be honest with you. I forgot what African nation he's from. Obi Ezekwe.
It's Nigerian.
Nigeria.
Ezekwe is from Nigeria.
Okay, so he's
from
Nigerian.
Nigeria.
So Obi,
the name.
Me, when I came out of high school, I was Malcolm X black nationalists. I was going to turn this white place black. So I'm going down to the brothers chit chatting, and I see Obi start talking about African Americans. Okay, and now I'm making a point here. I'm making a point. So all the brothers from the Richmond Tidewater area, these were your football players, your basketball players. They were there on scholarship, on sports scholarship. And Obi is talking about black mothers. I mean, he's saying if he was a white boy, he would have got his butt whipped. And all the black guys from the Richmond Tidewater area was laughing. So I said, hold on, what in the is going on here? I said, your mother is black. I mean, he was talking Aunt your mama, all this. So the reality is, I said, Obi, let's go outside, brother. If these brothers won't go outside, I'm gonna go outside with you, because we gotta have a come home to Jesus meeting. Because I'm not gonna spend the next 4 years with you and tolerate this from you, brother. Because if I start talking ignorant about Africa and say that your mother's running around naked running around naked and living in huts, you'll be ready to fight me. So please don't call my ancestors.
But Ray,
hold on.
Ray.
But I'm making a point, Shaman. I'm making a point. The point that I'm trying to make is there was a contingency of black folks who was laughing at Obi, who was just going to let it slide, who did not want to acknowledge the fact that he was being rude, he was being whatever you want to call it. Then you had me there, to put him on a carpet. And we won't get anywhere until we acknowledge that there's a problem here. Shamangi, you cannot say that there's not a problem. Yes, I understand.
No, wait.
But there's a problem.
Wait a second. Wait, please. There is a problem. That's why we're having the conversation. This is why we're doing the conference next year. But the division or the recognition of the problem does not start with acknowledging the fact that in order to get to the heart of the problem, we must ask the question, why is it that there is all difference between groups from Africa and groups from other parts of the world in the United States, but there is no division with them, though the same differences are there? But there is division between Africans and African Americans. So we can't say that because those differences are there, we have to acknowledge that. That doesn't do any good. Because the Irish people, German people, the Jewish people, pardon?
What doesn't do anything? Acknowledging that we have a problem?
No, acknowledging that there are differences. Acknowledging that the way African Americans think about marriage, for example, or the way they think about religion, the way they think about respect for family. Like I was telling a former colleague of ours, Yassine Bey, one time, he tried to say there's no difference between a sister from the continent of Africa and a black American sister. I said, no, there is difference. That doesn't mean we are divided, because a black sister from the United States, I can go find several black American sisters that will curse their own mama out. I can't find it on the continent of Africa, even if the mother has never been there in the child's life, even if the mother was a prostitute, even if the mother was an alcoholic. I can't find an African sister that will curse her mother out. But I can find that in black America. So difference is there.
Those are the social practices that I'm talking about. You know?
I understand. I understand.
Those are the points that we really need to.
But Kalai.
Yes.
Pink people in America, they will kill their own parents, literally go in and shoot up their parents. And African people will still associate with pink people in America. So don't say, okay, those social practices, pink people have different sexual activity with their own parents, and they legitimize it. And you all still find ways to have relationships with pink people, but not African people who don't do any of that kind of crazy stuff. So you can't say those are the social practices which justify difference or which
No,
cause that
I'm
division.
saying that those are what we look at, and those are the things that make us stay away, set us apart from the African
Okay, so
American.
okay, then you have to answer this question for me. You
Somebody
have
said
to answer this question, please. Why is it that you see the same? Linnell, I'm going to be quiet just now. But why that you see the same differences with European people in America, but you don't find yourselves being forced or compelled to stay away from them? Kalai, please answer that. You see the same difference with European people, but you're not saying that those are the things that make you stay away from pink people. You still have relationships with pink people. So why is that?
But I'm not able to really answer that accurately.
I can answer
but
that. I can answer that. I can answer that.
Exactly.
Here's
Okay,
a couple.
let's
Go ahead.
Exactly.
I'm gonna let Linnell speak. I can answer that.
no, I was just gonna go back to as as the brother was saying that he can find several black women, in America who would cuss their mamas out, in a heartbeat. Like he said, he can't find that on the continent of Africa. I'm dealing with, I deal with a lot of stuff in sales, and I've just come across this new TV streaming service. We got 3,000 channels. Now, what I was doing the other day, I was actually checking out all the continent that came from the continent of Africa. There's a lot of African stations, surprisingly, inside of this TV package. Now, inside of this TV package, I was watching the Be Black channel, right? I don't know what country that originated from the continent of Africa. But as I was watching these videos, as I was watching these music videos, everybody was happy, okay? It wasn't no guns. Everybody was dancing. It wasn't no bitch, wasn't no hoe, wasn't no nigga. All these things was totally missing from these music videos in contrast to what we see over here in America, right? So I can see a person coming over, from, let's say, Somalia, or something like that, and then being told, hey, don't mess with these African Americans, man, they lost their way. And then to coincide with that, they watch, a Little Yachty on BET.
So, Mr. Peter, you've been listening intently. I'm curious of what you want to contribute.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Peter. I live in New Zealand. I'm from Kenya, which is where Halai comes from as well. And there's some very interesting points have been made on the call so far. But what I see is that we're all looking at the symptoms of what seems to be the problem. I'm not really seeing anybody looking at the underlying causes. To go back to the cause, I think you've got to go to the root of the problem. You've got to go back to history. You got to ask yourself some questions. How was it that a very small group of Europeans, no more than 20, 30 at a time, were able to come to Africa and get hold of hundreds and millions of African captives and take them to the States? How did that happen? How did a very small group of Europeans come to Africa and carve out the continent between themselves, amongst themselves? How did that happen? How did 5 million white people in South Africa run the country for 400 years, despite more than 500 million Africans wanting to get rid of them? How did that happen? How is it that very small groups of Europeans are able to come to Africa or go to places where Africans are, and they're able to rise up and lead Africans, and Africans allow them to do it? That's the first question I think we need to ask ourselves if we are to get to the root of this problem. The second question we need to ask ourselves is how honest are Africans with themselves, whether on the continent or in the States or wherever they may be. And by Africans, I mean people of African origin. They might be African American, they might be Africans, they might be Papua New Guineans. I don't care. Just Africans. Africans are black people, and that's it. If you look at the information that comes from the US to the rest of the world about African Americans and Africans and the state of play in the US, one of the most powerful movements to come from there has been Black Lives Matter. When I look at it from the outside, I see something that doesn't quite make sense to me. So on the one hand, 20, 30 African Americans have been killed by police. They've been shot dead, and there have been protests, rightly so, all over America. But at the same time, over that same period, more than 700 African Americans have been killed by fellow African Americans in Chicago alone in 1 year, and I don't see a single protest. I don't see a single African American going out and saying, hey, they're killing our people. So does it only matter? Black lives only matter when the person killing is white? Or what's the message we're sending here? I think those questions go to the very root of our experience as a people. And I think the very first thing we need to be looking at is, who are we to ourselves? Because if we answer that question, we can explain why to a Somali, an African American is not a brother, but an Arab is a brother. We can explain why to a Ghanaian, an African American is not really a brother, but a white guy from the UK is a brother. We can explain why when I go to Fiji, they don't look at me as a brother. They see me as some guy who remotely looks like them, but they look at a white New Zealander as a brother. So what you need to do is to explain to ourselves why it is that Africans are so easily taken into making friends with alien people rather than fellow Africans first, and why Africans don't come to each other's support when outsiders come in. Look at Africa today. You've got Africa with 56 different countries. These are the same people, look like each other. They speak languages that are a bit different from each other, but it's no more different than Europe is. Europe is just a bunch of tribes. The Germans speak German, the French speak French, the English have English, and so on and so forth. But they're trying to coalesce together as one group under the EU. If you look at the Asians, if you go to China today, China is 2 billion people. What they don't tell you is that the Chinese don't speak the same language. They've got hundreds of languages, but above all these languages, they've got Mandarin or Cantonese. And they speak that as a lingua franca, and they've come together as one state, and they enforce that. If you go to India, it's the same thing. India has the largest number of black people on earth, even more than Africa, but they don't see themselves as black. They see themselves as Indian because the pan-Indian identity is stronger than the black identity. And so why is it that we black people are so, we find it so easy to make friends with other people other than fellow Africans? From the perspective of a Kenyan, I would say that the biggest success of white people has been to convince us that they are our friends and that our brothers and sisters are our enemies. So as a good example, the way a Kenyan is acculturated and brought up, we were taught English history when we were about 10 years old. We were taught European history in class when we were about 11 years old. By the time you get to high school, which is about grade 12 in the States, you know the history of the UK, the US, and all of these other countries, but you don't really know the history of the Ivory Coast right next door. Why? Because our curriculum in Kenya was defined by the British, and even after they left, that curriculum has never been revised by Kenyans to include more African content. Why? Because Kenyans do not see other Africans as important enough to warrant a discussion or a study of that history. We don't have African American history. We don't have Papuan history. Yeah.
I believe that, and I thank God for you being a part of this conversation. Now you are getting to the crux of what the issue is. And this is what I was hoping Kalai was going to go directly into when I asked her, why is it that the same differences between Kenyan culture or African culture are there between them and pink people, if not even more, but they don't feel that they need to stay away from pink people. This is the issue. We have, and this is why I keep saying it is manufactured. The film director Haile Garima said that before Europeans could capture any part of Africa, the first thing they had to do is capture the mind. Barack Obama wrote in his book when he first went to Kenya, he would sit with his grandmother there in their village, and she told him about how the Europeans came and they were building the railway, and nobody said anything. They just watched them, minds captivated by them doing things that had never been done. That's one reason. They captured the mind, And the way to maintain a grip on the mind is to completely obliterate a person's identity. And contrary to popular belief, Africans' identity, I'm talking about on the mainland, is greatly damaged, if not the same, maybe even more than the African Americans' identity. The only distinction you find there is Africans still have a connection with their history and their language. But in terms of culture, you know, it's always funny to me to hear Africans talking about they have their own culture when they don't feel comfortable in their own dress, they don't feel comfortable worshiping in their own cultural ways, they don't feel comfortable talking their language and speaking their language in formal environments. Put Tanzania on the side, which uses Swahili in its parliamentary procedure and whatnot, uses Swahili as the official language. Put them on the periphery. It's always funny to me to see Africans, Kenyans, South Africans, Zambians, wherever I go, talking about they still have their culture, but when I go inside of homes, they got a picture of a pink man on the wall calling him Jesus. And so that identity that we have as African people has been assaulted tremendously worldwide. This is why you find black people so far astray. Just like Joseph was named another name, Zaphnaphenihai, by the African king, we have been named a different name, and we have been determined to be what everybody else says we are. And there is no African identity anymore. The only way, or the way to start galvanizing ourselves and getting back together is, number one, to recognize our African identity. Whatever fragments of that identity are still there, it is for us to pull them together. That identity, and this is where I come right at African Americans, that identity cannot be established and will never be established independent of the African soil, of the African mainland.
So both of you brothers are absolutely correct. But here's what we have to understand. We're living in 2018. We've already had periods of, in America, the African American has already had periods of Black pride. All right, we experienced this in the late 60s and 70s where we were wearing dashikis and afros and trying to get back to our roots, and somehow that went astray. Also, although acknowledging that we are Africans, which most African Americans will not acknowledge that they are Africans, which is a problem. The only way we're going to start doing this, the reality is through economic empowerment.
Thank you.
When people see, when the people can really benefit from being African, then they will become African.
Exactly.
This is the when people hold on a second.
You are absolutely right.
Hold
Okay.
on a second. The problem that we have is when Black Americans look at Africa, they don't see the opportunity. But everyone else sees opportunity. The Indian sees opportunity. The Chinese man sees opportunity. The European sees opportunity. Everyone else. We have to change that. We have to look at Africa. And so when a Black person of the diaspora sees Africa, they see opportunity. And then when they see the financial opportunity, they will visit Africa in large numbers with investment. The people who have investment, the other Africans will see them because they will be well-spoken. They will have wives. They will treat their wives appropriately. They will take care of their kids. They will be men and women of God. You understand? So the examples that they see, because the people who are going to travel to Africa are going to be the best of us. They're going to be the best of us.
Okay.
So
Great,
just,
great.
That's when
Ray, excuse me. 1 second, Peter. 1 second, please. I'm down to about 10 minutes, and I have to leave the call. I didn't know how long you all wanted to express, but I carved out an hour for this.
Okay.
I think that progressively speaking, if people now could speak to what Ray just talked about in terms of making the value of investing in Africa or the value of Africa known to its descendants, particularly African Americans, and we haven't even begun to talk about the blacks in South America, which are far higher in number than black Americans. But how can we start doing that? How can we start showing the appeal of Africa? It is not enough to just say they should already see it, they should recognize it, but how can we show the appeal of Africa or show Africans of the diaspora, particularly African Americans, descendants of slaves in America, the great benefit they have of investing time, resources, skill, and finances in the continent of Africa?
I think it starts with the fact that we don't even have African products, you know. Shmangaliso, you sent me a video some time ago about this Zambian lady that is manufacturing noodles in Zambia. And she was talking about the Zambians not understanding that that is a Zambian product. When they go to the market, they'd rather buy the Chinese noodles over what she had. Yet has a standard. I mean, it's her product is high quality, you know, and the price is competitive. So if we're not really proud of what it is that we have as Africans, how can we show that to other people? We don't really have African products. I think if we're talking about economic empowerment, it starts with African products. What are those? What could they be? How can we highlight them?
Well, it's interesting because there's something called Kickstarter that everyone uses for investment, for initial investment. The problem is that the African American and the Africans of the diaspora has to be the Kickstarter for Africa. We were talking about this last night, yesterday, KJ. Until the African American goes to Nike and say, forget Colin Kaepernick, forget Colin Kaepernick. What I want you to do is, I want you to move those manufacturing centers in China and bring them to Africa. You take half of your manufacturing and you put those in African so African get those jobs. Since we're the people that made you. African Americans made Nike. There would be no Nike if it wasn't for the African American. And until we start demanding things of substance, actions of substance, but I don't care that you give Colin Kaepernick $20 million or whatever you gave him, okay? I care that you bring jobs to Africa. Until Africans start seeing that movement where African Americans say, hey, look, we made your brand, Gucci. We made your brand, Louis Vuitton. We put you on a map. Now send your manufacturing to Africa or you don't get our business anymore. Until then, all of this talk that we're talking is garbage. Because then when Africans start seeing that we support the mainland, they will start supporting us.
I would disagree, Ray, and the reason I disagree is this. Africa has 1 billion people, and with all due respect, the number of African Americans is 30 million. That is barely one little country in Africa. 30 million people are not going to save 1 billion people. And the reason for that is very simple. The problems you've got in Africa cannot be fixed by even half a billion people unless you take out the systems, the structures that Europeans have put in place to ensure that Africa remains divided. So a good example. It is easier for me to fly from Kenya to the UK than it is for me to fly from Kenya to Cameroon. Why? Because Cameroon was colonized partly by the French, and the entire travel, industrial, and business systems connect via Paris. So for me to fly to Cameroon, I've got to go to the UK first, and then go to France, and then from France, that's my son, he's called Peter Jr. And then from France, I've got to go to, say hello. I've got to go over to Cameroon. Now, the impetus for changing the way Africa is will need to come from Africa itself. If African Americans and other diaspora Africans want to help to kickstart this, they've got to come to the continent. And the first thing they've got to work on is to get African countries talking to each other, to get Africans talking to each other, to get Kenyans and Somalis to understand that they have a common enemy. This enemy is European domination of Africa, Chinese domination of Africa, Indian domination of Africa. Once you get the people to understand that and to look at each other not as enemies, but as brothers and sisters, you've started moving in a good direction.
Mr. Peter, I wasn't talking about saving Africa. I wasn't talking about saving Africa. No. I was talking about bridging the communication between African Americans and Africa. African Americans cannot save Africa. So
wait a second. I think both of you guys are right. I think Peter, I'm wholeheartedly in agreement with most of what Peter said, except one thing. And this idea that African Americans in number are not strong, are not enough to do what Africa needs to be saved, as if it actually needs to be saved. We just need to get our heads out of the sand and live life. The Jews in the United States are far fewer in number than the African Americans, far fewer in number.
They run the world.
But they are organized. You got to understand that. They are organized.
Right.
So nothing happens in the United States unless Israel says it's okay.
That's right.
Israel has helped the Jews organize in the United States. If Africa organizes African America or helps African America organize with a far greater number than the Jews, then it is Africa which will be determining what goes on in the United States and determining what goes on in the world. You have to understand at this point, mineral resources are a large part of African income. But if you want to know the price of metals in Africa coming from the ground, you go to the LME, the London Metals Exchange. That's a big problem there.
Pan-African, if I could just jump in very quickly, it's a good example that you gave about the Jews. And the one thing you need to note about the Jews is that regardless of where they're from, whether they're Chinese Jews or Indian Jews or European Jews or Ethiopian Jews, they 100%. See themselves Jews first. And exactly. They identify with a common culture and a common language, Hebrew, even if they don't speak it. A lot of them speak some version of German called Yiddish, but they have a desire to go back to Israel to learn the language, identify as Jews, and wherever they go, Jewish interests come first. That's why Africans need to learn that regardless of what languages we speak or whatever cultures we've been given or we think we're one people. Once you understand that bit and you see the power that comes with being one people, nothing can stop you.
I think you.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think that's a great way to end. Since you have to call, I think that's a great.
Well, let Brother Linnell come in. Let Brother Linnell come in before we close, and then Kalai.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in, man, and say, man, this has been, impactful, very impactful on me. Seeing that, you're in South Africa. We got the sister in Kenya, we got the brother in in Riyadh, and you got the other brother over here in New Zealand. Okay. This is
we got the brother in Cleveland. You in Cleveland.
Right. Yeah, right now I'm in Missouri actually, so yeah. Right. But man, this has been, very eye-opening, very mind-challenging. Because it was some of the things that I have been thinking about that you brothers had touched on, and I never really could, nail it down as to why, why these things, I had certain ideas just because, the imagery that, and, I've always believed deep down that, people might tell somebody from the continent of Africa when they get here, don't deal with the African American simply because, we may have lost our culture, and I actually heard that today coming from, a person who resides on the continent of Africa. You know what I'm saying? So that alone to me, has been eye-opening today. And I mean, y'all right, man. It's the social economic structures, man. And just like the doctor, the good doctor just said, if Africa would empower us over here in the United States, like the Zionist movement, and the Israelis actually empower the Jews in this country, yeah, it'd be a beautiful thing.
KJ.
Yeah, I'm really grateful that we had this tonight, and I would suggest that we do this again probably after a month or two. And there's a question that someone had put in the comments in the original post that we didn't have time to address, but maybe in the next meeting, if there will be one, we can talk about how the Black people are viewed in other parts of the world, not just in America. And will that be a common thread? Everywhere you go, you get the same kind of interaction or not? We need to look at that. And Peter has downloaded some serious information for all of us to think about. If we don't really know who we are, then how can we move forward? So yeah.
All right.
Well done, Ray. I suggest you set it up at least once a month. I don't think we need to wait 2 months. I don't think we need to do it every week either. But if we can do this once a month, the next meeting being around this time next month would be ideal. Let me say this. I don't need to keep plugging because I don't need to. I'm not trying to sneak it in because I'm going to beat down everybody who is remotely close to me, remotely connected. Next year, June 2019, Brother Linnell, Peter, KJ, Durban, South Africa, we're having a Pan-African conference dealing with healing, reconciliation, and investment for the purpose of progress. Make plans to be in Durban, South Africa, June 2019. The details of that program and that conference will be forthcoming.
All right. Peace. Everyone be safe. Salam alaikum.
All right. Good to meet you guys. Bye.
Likewise. Thank you.
Peace.